There's a moment she never prepared for, not the breakup, not the distance, but the moment your silence stopped sounding emotional and started feeling intentional. When it no longer carried frustration, longing, or unspoken hope. When it felt calm, grounded, and complete. That's when something inside her shifted. She didn't expect your silence to change her this much, because she assumed silence meant uncertainty or waiting. And that quiet transformation didn't just alter the dynamic between you. It forced her to confront herself in ways she wasn't ready for. In this video, we're going to walk through why your silence had such a powerful impact, what it awakened in her, and how calm detachment changes everything without you saying a word. If this resonates with you, take a second to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and let's get into it. Number 1. The silence that broke her expectations. She expected silence to mean uncertainty, maybe confusion, maybe you replaying every moment, wondering if you should say something, waiting for the right excuse to reach out. That's the kind of silence she knew, the kind that still leans forward, still asks for permission, still hopes for a response. But what she felt from you this time was something else entirely. It wasn't anxious. It wasn't heavy. It was measured, grounded, intentional. And that difference caught her off guard. Put yourself in her place for a moment. She creates space, assuming it will pull you off balance. She waits for a message that never comes, a reaction that never shows up. At first, she tells herself, you're just busy, or stubborn, or trying to make a point. But as the days pass, the absence starts to feel stable. There's no emotional noise coming from you, no indirect signals, no attempts to test the waters. And that's when the unease begins, because silence was supposed to weaken you, not reveal control. Epictetus taught that strength isn't shown in what you say, but in what you refuse to say when provoked. Your silence embodied that idea without explanation. It wasn't absence, it was discipline. You weren't silent to manipulate. You weren't withholding to protect your pride. You were silent because you had already reclaimed authority over your inner world. And that kind of silence doesn't ask to be understood. It simply exists. She starts to realize that this isn't the quiet of someone waiting to be chosen. It's the quiet of someone who has already chosen himself. That realization shifts the emotional ground beneath her. In the past, silence from you might have meant pressure building, emotions stacking up, and eventual release. This time, there's no pressure, no urgency, just a calm that doesn't bend around her reactions. And that calm tells her something words never could. Stoicism teaches that when you remove dependence on outcomes, you regain freedom. Your silence reflected that freedom. You weren't trying to control how she felt, and that's precisely what made the silence powerful. It left her without the familiar levers to pull. She couldn't provoke reassurance. She couldn't trigger emotion. She couldn't predict the next move. All she could do was feel the shift. And that's why this silence changed her more than she expected. It wasn't dramatic. It didn't announce itself. It didn't demand attention. It quietly rewrote the dynamic. Like Marcus Aurelius observed, the most unshakable thing is the mind that remains steady regardless of circumstance. Your silence became evidence of that steadiness. And once she sensed it, she understood something she hadn't planned for at all. This wasn't a pause, a tactic, or a phase. It was a new center. And from that center, everything between you felt different. Number 2. When absence replaced emotional negotiation. She was used to emotional exchanges, clarifying, revisiting, negotiating feelings. Your silence ended that pattern without confrontation. And that's what quietly disrupted everything she thought she understood about the dynamic between you. She expected distance to trigger another round of discussion, another attempt to clear the air, another emotional checkpoint where roles could be re-established. In her mind, silence was just a pause before the next conversation. What she didn't expect was that the conversation never came. From her perspective, emotional negotiation had always been the bridge. If something felt off, it could be talked through. If tension appeared, it could be softened with words, explanations, or emotional appeals. That process gave her a sense of influence, a feeling that connection could always be restored through dialogue. But your silence didn't argue, didn't correct, and didn't ask to be understood. It simply stepped away. And absence, unlike words, offers no leverage. This is where the change began to take hold. Without your participation, there was no emotional exchange to manage, no reactions to measure, no tone to adjust. She could no longer test where she stood by provoking a response or reopening a discussion. Instead, she was left alone with the unanswered questions she used to bring to you. And that internal shift, having to sit with her own emotions instead of shaping yours, was far more unsettling than any argument ever was. Chrysippus believed that once reason governs the mind, persuasion loses its grip. What you demonstrated wasn't detachment for effect, it was self-command. You didn't withdraw to punish or manipulate. You withdrew because you no longer needed resolution through emotional negotiation. That quiet discipline removed the arena where she once felt powerful. There was no stage left for persuasion, no opening where intensity could influence the outcome. Think about how this lands for her over time. She considers reaching out, rehearses what she might say, imagines explaining herself in a way that once would have pulled you back in. But then she realizes something has changed. Even if she speaks, the old dynamic won't return. You would listen calmly, maybe respond briefly, but you wouldn't re-enter the emotional back and forth. And that realization hits deeper than rejection. It signals a loss of influence. A Stoic understands that not every emotion needs to be processed together, and not every connection survives the removal of negotiation. By choosing absence, you didn't escalate the situation or make a dramatic exit. You simply stopped participating in a pattern that no longer aligned with who you are. And that's why your silence changed her more than she ever expected. It didn't challenge her directly. It quietly showed her that the power had shifted, and that some doors don't close with an argument, but with calm finality. Before we move on, take a moment to sit with this shift. Not just what it did to her, but what it reflects about you. There's a difference between walking away in frustration and stepping back in clarity, and you can probably feel which one this was. Ask yourself where you stopped negotiating your emotions and started protecting your peace. If this resonates, leave a comment sharing what changed for you in that moment, or simply type, "Calm is my closure," below. Let that be your marker before we take the next step. Number 3. She felt the loss of emotional access. Before, she could reach you emotionally. A message, a memory, a subtle pull, and you'd respond. Maybe it was a late-night text that always seemed to arrive at the perfect moment, or a familiar phrase she knew would draw you back into conversation. That access made her feel connected, but it also made her feel in control. She knew where to find you emotionally. She knew which doors were open. And for a long time, she walked through them without hesitation. Then your silence appeared not sharp, not dramatic, not designed to punish. It was calm. It was steady. And that calm is what unsettled her more than anything else. She tried the same approaches, replayed the same memories in her mind, imagined sending the same kind of message, but something felt different. The emotional doorway she relied on was no longer there. Not locked in anger, just no longer offered. From her perspective, this is where the change begins. Silence forces her to realize that emotional access was never guaranteed. It was granted. When she senses that you're no longer waiting, no longer hovering emotionally, She feels a quiet loss she can't easily name. There's no argument to respond to, no tension to break. Just space. And space makes her aware of how much she once depended on your emotional availability. Hierocles taught that our inner world has layers of closeness, and that wisdom lies in being intentional about who stands near the center. A Stoic man doesn't explain when someone moves outward in those circles. He doesn't justify it, he simply lives in alignment with his values. Your silence does exactly that. Without a single word, it redraws the boundary of access to your inner life. And if you're listening to this, you may recognize this shift in yourself. You didn't decide to withdraw to provoke a reaction. You stepped back because constant emotional availability no longer felt honest or peaceful. You chose steadiness over exposure, and that choice changes how she sees you. She expected silence to weaken the bond, to make you restless or uncertain. Instead, it revealed your self-command. What she didn't expect is that losing emotional access would make her reflect, not react. She starts to wonder why the connection feels different now, why your absence carries weight instead of emptiness. And that's the moment where the dynamic truly changes. Your silence isn't about pushing her away, it's about protecting your inner world. And when emotional access is no longer automatic, it becomes valuable. Number 4. Her certainty began to fracture. What unsettled her wasn't missing you, it was not knowing where she stood. And that difference matters more than most people realize. Missing someone can be familiar, even comfortable. Uncertainty is not. Before your silence, she always had reference points. A reply that came quickly or slowly. A tone that revealed where you were emotionally. A reaction that confirmed she still had influence. Even when things weren't perfect, she could orient herself around your responses. When you stepped back, that orientation vanished. She didn't expect your silence to change her this much, because she assumed distance would create longing, not destabilization. But instead of simply thinking about you, she began questioning herself. You can picture it clearly. She opens a message thread, scrolls through old conversations, searching for patterns that no longer exist. She considers sending something casual, maybe even lighthearted, but then hesitates. Not because she doesn't want to reach out, but because she can't predict what would happen if she did. Would you respond warmly, neutrally? Would you respond at all? That gap between intention and outcome is where her certainty starts to crack. And once that crack forms, it quietly widens. Cleanthes taught that the mind resists what it cannot anchor to certainty, and your emotional steadiness removed every anchor she once relied on. You didn't offer reassurance to calm her nerves. You didn't show irritation she could interpret as lingering attachment. You didn't push back in a way that let her feel significant through conflict. There was no emotional friction, no signal to decode, just calm. And calm, when it can't be interpreted, becomes unsettling. Without feedback, her confidence has nothing to feed on. This is the part many men misunderstand. Your silence isn't loud to her, it's ambiguous. And ambiguity forces introspection. She starts wondering if the version of herself that felt secure around you was only secure because you were emotionally available on demand. When that availability disappears, so does the certainty she carried. She doesn't feel rejected in a dramatic way. She feels unplaced, and being unplaced is far more destabilizing than being missed. If you're watching this and thinking, "I'm not trying to send a message, I'm just staying centered," that's exactly the point. Stoicism was never about controlling others. It was about governing yourself so fully that your peace no longer depends on reaction. By remaining steady, by not rushing to define the situation for her, you allowed reality to surface on its own. Her confidence didn't erode because you disappeared. It eroded because your silence revealed something she didn't expect to face. That her certainty was built on emotional access, not emotional security. Number 5. The calm she couldn't trigger. She expected a reaction, frustration, curiosity, something she could work with. Instead, she met calm. And not the kind of calm that feels forced or performative, but the kind that comes from someone who is no longer internally negotiating. This is what caught her off guard. In the past, even when you tried to stay composed, there was still movement beneath the surface. A delayed reply carried tension. A short message carried meaning. She could sense when she still mattered, because your energy shifted around her presence. This time, it didn't. She noticed it in small, almost invisible moments. She read your reply twice, expecting to find something underneath it, a question, an opening, a sign that she could steer the interaction. There was none. Your words were simple. Your timing was unremarkable. There was no urgency, no emotional charge, no subtle pull asking her to step closer. And what unsettled her wasn't that you were distant. It was that you seemed complete without her input. Zeno of Citium believed harmony begins when emotion no longer leads the mind. And this is where the shift truly happened. Your composure wasn't a strategy aimed at her. It was the result of alignment within yourself. Because you were no longer led by reaction, there was no emotional feedback loop for her to activate. Before, tension created motion. Emotion created leverage. Now, calm absorbed everything without changing shape. When she imagined provoking a response by being warm, cold, nostalgic, or vague, she realized it would all land the same way. Gently, neutrally, without consequence. And if you're watching this, you may recognize how different this feels inside you. You're not biting your tongue. You're not counting days. You're simply no longer pulled off center by uncertainty. Silence isn't something you're using. It's something you're comfortable standing in. That comfort is what changed her more than any message ever could. Because when calm can't be triggered, it forces the other person to confront something they weren't prepared for, the realization that their emotional influence no longer reaches you. And that quiet realization lingers far longer than any argument or explanation ever would. This is the point where everything quietly settles. Not because something was said, but because nothing needed to be. When calm becomes natural, it reveals a level of inner alignment that doesn't seek reaction or validation. Sit with that for a second and notice where this steadiness has already shown up in your own life. If it resonates, share your thoughts in the comments, or simply type "My calm speaks for itself" below. And when you're ready, let's continue, because the next shift goes even deeper than she expected. Number 6. Silence forced her into self-reflection. Without your attention to distract her, she had to sit with herself. And that's a situation most people try to avoid for as long as they can. Before, your presence acted like a buffer between her and her own inner world. A message from you could lift her mood. A reaction from you could reassure her. Even tension between you gave her something to focus on. There was movement, feedback, emotional noise. But when you went silent, all of that stopped at once. No signals to read, no responses to interpret. Just stillness. At first, she probably told herself it didn't matter. She stayed busy. She filled the time. But silence has a way of following you into quiet moments. Late at night, during pauses in the day. In those gaps, the thoughts she used to push aside started surfacing. Marcus Aurelius wrote that when the noise fades, the mind reveals what it's been avoiding. And that's exactly what happened here. Your silence didn't create her thoughts, it removed the distractions that kept them hidden. She began replaying moments she once skimmed over. Things you said that didn't register at the time. Times you showed patience instead of reaction. Times you gave more than she acknowledged. Without your presence to soften the emotional edges, those memories felt sharper, more honest. She couldn't outsource her uncertainty to you anymore. She couldn't check in just to feel grounded. She had to ground herself, and she realized she wasn't as steady as she thought. If you've ever stepped back from constant communication, you know this phase well. The first response is discomfort. Silence feels heavy because it forces clarity. A Stoic understands that clarity often arrives disguised as unease. When you removed yourself calmly, without bitterness or explanation, you didn't leave a void, you left a mirror. And mirrors don't argue, they simply show what's there. She expected your silence to feel like distance. Instead, it felt like exposure. With nothing to react to, her emotions turned inward. She started questioning not just the situation, but herself. Why does his absence feel different from others? Why can't I dismiss it the way I thought I could? Why does his calm linger in my mind more than his attention ever did? These weren't questions she planned to ask. They arose naturally because silence made them unavoidable. And here's the deeper shift she didn't anticipate. Your silence didn't make her feel powerful. It made her feel aware. Stoicism teaches that we don't control what others realize, we only control how we carry ourselves. By choosing restraint over reaction, you allowed her to confront her own thoughts without interference. No pressure, no persuasion, just space. And in that space, self-reflection did the work you never could. Number 7. She realized time wasn't working in her favor. At first, she leaned on time like a quiet advantage. She told herself that space would soften you, that distance would stir memories, that eventually curiosity or emotion would pull you back into the familiar rhythm you once shared. Waiting felt safe to her. It meant she didn't have to risk vulnerability or face rejection. Time, in her mind, would do the emotional work for her. But what she didn't expect was that time wouldn't slow you down, it would sharpen you. As the days passed, something subtle but unsettling became clear. You weren't stuck replaying old moments. You weren't hovering in uncertainty. You were moving forward, calmly, without announcements or explanations. And that's when the balance began to shift. Seneca warned that time exposes reality, it doesn't rewrite it. Time doesn't bend strong character back into old habits. It reveals what is real when emotion is no longer steering the wheel. From her perspective, this is deeply confusing. She checks in with the idea of you, wondering if enough time has passed for longing to grow. But instead of feeling closer, she feels the distance widen. Your silence doesn't feel empty anymore, it feels intentional. The longer it lasts, the more she senses that you're not waiting for the right moment. You've already chosen your direction, and that realization quietly unsettles her. This is where time stops being neutral for her and starts working against her. Each passing day reinforces the same truth. Your calm isn't fading, it's stabilizing. Your resolve isn't cracking, it's settling in. Marcus Aurelius reminded us that a person aligned with purpose is unmoved by delay or expectation. While she hoped time would reopen the door, time was actually teaching her that the door no longer holds the same meaning for you. And that's the moment she didn't anticipate. Waiting was supposed to preserve her position, not weaken it. But time has a way of revealing growth without permission. As you continue living your life, grounded and self-directed, she begins to feel the pressure she once avoided. Not because you're doing anything to her, but because you're no longer orienting yourself around her. If you're watching this and recognizing yourself in this shift, understand what's happening. You're not being distant out of spite. You're not withholding to prove a point. You're simply allowing time to align with discipline and purpose. That's the Stoic difference. And sometimes, the most powerful change doesn't come from what you say or do, but from letting time reveal that you've already moved on. Number 8. Your detachment changed her self-image. She once measured herself by how she affected you. Your reactions validated her identity. When those reactions disappeared, her reflection fractured. At first, she tried to minimize it. She told herself you were just busy, that your silence didn't mean anything, that she still held the same place in your world. But as time passed and your energy stayed calm and unchanged, the story she relied on began to feel thin. The confidence she once carried so effortlessly now needed reassurance, and there was none coming from you. From her side, this is deeply unsettling. She reaches for her phone almost on instinct, expecting the familiar pattern, a message, a reaction, some emotional signal that confirms she still has influence. But instead, she's met with something she can't read or manage. Not coldness, not anger, just emotional neutrality. And neutrality is far more destabilizing than rejection because it offers no clear role to step into. There's nothing to fix, nothing to perform, nothing to lean on. Musonius Rufus taught that character weakens when it depends on external validation. And without realizing it, she had built part of her self-image around how she moved you. Your attention was the mirror she checked herself in. When that mirror disappeared, she didn't just miss you, she missed the version of herself that existed through your eyes. Your detachment didn't criticize her, didn't confront her, didn't even explain itself. It simply stopped reinforcing the identity she had grown comfortable with. This is where the change becomes internal. She starts replaying moments, not to reconnect, but to understand. She wonders when the shift happened, when you stopped needing her reactions, when your presence became grounded instead of responsive. And that quiet questioning does something powerful. It forces her to look inward instead of outward. For the first time, she has to sit with herself without your emotional feedback shaping the experience. If you're watching this and recognizing your own calm withdrawal, understand what's really happening. You didn't take anything from her. You gave yourself back to yourself. Stoicism teaches that when a man no longer ties his inner state to someone else's approval, he becomes steady, and that steadiness has gravity. Your silence isn't loud, but it's firm. It doesn't demand attention, yet it changes the emotional landscape around you. She didn't expect your silence to change her this much, because she never realized how much of her self-image was built on your response. And now, without that reflection, she's left to confront a question she didn't plan on facing. Who am I when I'm no longer needed to move him? As you sit with this moment, take a second to notice what's shifted inside you too. Not in what you did, but in what you no longer needed. This isn't about proving a point or creating distance for effect. It's about recognizing the quiet strength that comes from being anchored in yourself. If any part of this feels familiar, let it settle. Reflect on where you stopped reaching for validation and started choosing steadiness instead. And if you feel compelled, leave a comment sharing what this realization has brought up for you, or simply type, "My calm is my ground," as a reminder of where your power now lives. Number 9. She noticed you didn't need closure. You didn't seek answers. You didn't demand explanations. That unsettled her more than she ever expected. In her world, closure usually comes with a conversation. One last exchange where emotions are unpacked, intentions are clarified, and the story feels neatly wrapped. She may have assumed that moment was inevitable, that eventually you would reach out to ask why, to understand what went wrong, or to reclaim some emotional clarity. But that moment never came. And when it didn't, something quietly shifted inside her. From her perspective, your silence felt different than distance. Distance still carries expectation. Silence, on the other hand, carried finality. You weren't waiting for her version of events to feel okay again. You weren't lingering in the past, replaying moments or searching for hidden meanings. You accepted what happened and allowed it to be enough. Posidonius believed peace comes from accepting events as they are, not as we wish them to be. Without saying a word, you practiced that principle. You didn't fight reality. You didn't try to rewrite it. You stepped forward with calm acceptance, and that calm did something she didn't anticipate. Think about how that lands on her. emotionally. When someone still needs closure, there's a sense of leverage. There's a belief that words can still shape the outcome, that one more explanation might soften the ending or restore a sense of control. But when you no longer need that conversation, that leverage disappears. She realizes there's nothing left to clarify because you're no longer asking to be convinced of anything. Your inner decision has already been made. And that realization can feel unsettling because it removes her role in your emotional process. You might recognize this shift in yourself. At some point, you stopped waiting for answers because you understood that no explanation would change how you felt or where you were headed. You didn't need closure from her because you gave it to yourself. That's a deeply Stoic act, not emotional detachment out of bitterness, but clarity born from self-command. Marcus Aurelius reminded us that peace comes when we stop demanding that the world make sense on our terms. You embodied that idea by choosing peace over prolonged dialogue. For her, this is where your silence changes her more than she expected. She sees that you didn't move on by erasing the past or pretending it didn't matter. You moved on by integrating it and continuing forward without resentment or longing. There's no unresolved tension for her to return to, no emotional thread she can pull later. Your stillness communicates that the ending already happened internally, quietly, without drama. And that's what lingers in her mind. Not the absence of words, but the presence of a man who no longer needs permission, explanation, or closure to keep moving toward his own peace. Number 10. Control quietly slipped from her hands. Silence removed her leverage. No emotional buttons to press, no reactions to steer. And what she didn't expect was how deeply that absence would affect her. There was a time when she could sense your mood shift just by changing her tone. A delayed reply, a carefully chosen word, even a hint of distance, and you'd respond. Not because you were weak, but because you cared. That emotional access gave her a sense of control, even if she never named it that way. Now imagine what it feels like from her side when that access disappears. She sends a message and waits for the familiar ripple. Nothing. She posts something subtle, half expecting it to reach you. Silence. There's no signal coming back to confirm she still has influence. That's when uncertainty creeps in. Not loud, not dramatic, but unsettling. Because control doesn't usually vanish in an argument. It vanishes when there's nothing left to pull on. Cato the Younger believed that true freedom begins when a man governs himself. And this is where that idea becomes real for you. Your silence isn't punishment, it's self-command. You're no longer outsourcing your emotional direction to someone else's actions. You're not reacting out of habit or hope. You're choosing stillness because you're centered, not because you're trying to prove anything. And here's the part most people miss. When you stop reacting, you don't just change the dynamic, you remove the entire mechanism she relied on. Without resistance, there's nothing to push against. Without emotion on display, there's nothing to manage. That's why control slips so quietly. There's no moment she can point to and say, "This is when it changed." She just feels it. The ground underneath the dynamic shifts, and she realizes she's no longer steering anything at all. If you've felt this shift in yourself, if you've noticed that calm has replaced urgency and clarity has replaced explanation, understand this isn't distance, it's growth. And growth, when it's real, always changes more than just you. Number 12. She changed because you didn't. Your calm didn't feel temporary. It felt complete. Not cold, not bitter, finished. And that's what unsettled her more than anything else. She had experienced distance from you before, quiet stretches, moments where you pulled back, pauses that still carried emotion underneath. Those silences always felt reversible. This one didn't. This one felt settled, like something had been decided without announcement. When she thought about you now, she didn't sense tension or unfinished business. She sensed closure that didn't need to be explained. You can probably feel the difference in yourself too. You didn't withdraw to provoke a reaction or to be missed. You withdrew because your inner world stopped revolving around her responses. Your energy went back into your own rhythm, your work, your body, your mind, your peace. You weren't trying to show strength. You were simply no longer spending it. And that kind of calm carries a finality to it. Seneca wrote that growth often separates us from those attached to our former selves, and that separation isn't loud or dramatic. It's quiet. It's natural. It happens the moment a man no longer needs to return to who he used to be. From her perspective, this felt irreversible because there was nothing left to pull on. No emotional thread to tug, no reaction to awaken, no version of you that still lingered in uncertainty. When she imagined reaching out, she didn't imagine resistance or longing. She imagined composure, a polite response, a steady tone, maybe even warmth, but without attachment. And that realization carried weight, because warmth without need confirms that the distance isn't punishment. It's progression. What changed her most was understanding that this wasn't a phase you were passing through, it was a place you had arrived at. Your calm told her that even if paths crossed again, the dynamic would never reset to what it was. You wouldn't come back searching. You wouldn't reopen emotional ground. You would meet her as someone complete, not someone waiting. And that's when the distance stopped feeling like time apart and started feeling permanent, not because you closed the door, but because you walked forward without looking back. Take a moment to sit with what that really means. Not just what it did to her, but what it reveals about you. This kind of calm doesn't come from strategy or restraint. It comes from alignment, from choosing yourself without resentment, and moving forward without needing anything to be different than it is. If this resonates, pause the video for a second and notice where your energy is now compared to where it used to be. And if you want to anchor that awareness, leave a comment sharing what shifted for you. Let's explore the next chapter of this story together. Number 12. She changed because you didn't. The final shift wasn't in her behavior, it was in her awareness. You remained steady, unmoved, aligned with yourself. And that's what caught her off guard. She expected silence to soften you, to make you restless, to eventually pull you back into the familiar rhythm of explanation and emotional negotiation. Instead, your silence felt complete, not temporary, not performative. Complete. And that quiet completeness forced her to look inward rather than outward. From her perspective, something stopped making sense. Time passed, yet the image of you didn't deteriorate. You didn't spiral. You didn't reach out with late-night questions or subtle signals. You didn't try to reclaim a place in her emotional world. You simply continued as you were centered, composed, moving forward without needing her reaction to validate you. That consistency disrupted the story she had been telling herself, the one where distance eventually makes you bend. Epictetus taught that real power lies in governing your own responses, not in controlling external events. Without announcing it, you practiced that discipline. You stopped reacting to what you couldn't control and invested fully in what you could. Your conduct, your peace, your direction. And that's when the shift happened. She began to realize that nothing she did or didn't do was shaping you anymore. The influence she once assumed was gone. What unsettled her most wasn't the silence itself, but what it represented. Your stillness suggested resolution. Not resentment, not avoidance. Resolution. And when someone encounters a man who has resolved himself internally, it forces comparison. She began measuring her uncertainty against your clarity, her emotional fluctuation against your stability. That contrast quietly altered her perspective. If you're watching this and feeling that sense of calm in yourself, understand this isn't about winning or proving a point. This is what happens when you stop negotiating your peace. By remaining who you are, you became the constant in a situation built on change. And that constancy didn't just affect the dynamic between you, it reshaped how she saw you, and ultimately, how she saw herself. And this is where everything comes together. Not because she suddenly changed her mind, reached out, or said the words you once waited to hear, but because something inside you settled for good. Your silence wasn't a tactic, a pause, or a reaction. It was the natural outcome of self-mastery. By choosing calm over explanation, alignment over negotiation, and peace over emotional noise, you became steady in a way that no reaction ever could. And that steadiness didn't just shift the dynamic between you and her, it reshaped how she experienced the absence itself. What once felt familiar now felt final. What once felt controllable now felt out of reach. Not because you pushed her away, but because you stopped abandoning yourself. If this message resonated with you, take a moment to like this video. It helps more men find clarity like this. Leave a comment and share what part of this shift you recognized most in yourself. And when you're ready, watch the recommended videos on screen to continue building calm, discipline, and inner strength without saying a word.